In 1933, Hitler came to power in Germany with devastating consequences for Europe's Jewish population.
My father lost his job because being Jewish, working for the stock exchange. The stock exchange in Germany is government controlled. It's like a government agency. And since Jews were considered enemies of Germany, they let him go.
In 1935, the Nuremberg laws formalized discrimination against the Jews and stripped them of their German citizenship.
Well, they could no longer go to public schools in my era, and we knew that our mother lost her job. She could not work, they could not be employed in German firms, and the Jewish firms which she was working for in a warehouse in a department store had to close because they didn't allow non-Jews to patronize it, and so therefore they lost their jobs, and we felt that not being welcomed on the streets.
On the 10th of November 1938, in a thinly veiled act of retribution that was triggered by the assassination of a German ambassador by a young Polish Jew in Paris, the Nazis unleashed a night of terror and destruction on Jewish communities across Germany and Austria. It was to become known as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. Jews were violently beaten, shops looted, synagogues destroyed, and 30,000 Jewish men and boys were rounded up and sent to concentration camps.
And they took the Jews and put them into the camp. And also the Jews then became, had to wear the Star of David, I think it was a yellow band. During Kristallnacht, if the Nazis would have known that Schmeling was hiding me and my brother in his suite at the Excelsior Hotel, they probably would have shot him and shot us too.
The synagogues were burned when Jewish-owned stores were destroyed, and my father had been tipped off ahead of time that something like this would happen, and we went underground for about 3 weeks. However, that was kind of the decision point that they decided to get out of the country.
We tried South America and the US and all those countries, and we couldn't get a visa for any place. The last place in the world where we could go was Shanghai. Why? Because they did not require a visa or anything. And Shanghai was an open city at that time that you could go to without, you just landed. Nobody would question you.
Although known as a paradise for adventurers and the Paris of the Orient, Shanghai was to provide an unlikely refuge for thousands of Jewish refugees escaping the horrors of Nazi Germany. At a time when all doors were closed, Shanghai was one of the only places in the world which did not require an entry visa. As refugees flooded in, the established Jewish communities in Shanghai rose to the challenge, immediately fundraising and organizing committees to deal with the refugee community's most urgent needs. Horace Kadoorie established the Shanghai Jewish Youth Association in 1937. It funded tuition, created employment opportunities for young Jews, and organized summer camps. Laura Margolis, the first female agent for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, otherwise known as the Joint, helped save thousands of lives from starvation through her sheer tenacity and courage. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the entry of Western democracies into the Pacific War, the Japanese military occupied the colonial settlements in Shanghai. They took over the entire city and declared British and American citizens to be enemy aliens. Japanese policy towards the Jews was often ambivalent. Although Nazi emissaries often urged the Japanese to emulate their genocidal policies against the Jews, they refused.
I was told by one of the men who was here now that the Germans had actually established a gas chamber in Shanghai. I didn't know that. And the Japanese wanted the Japanese to send them clients. And the Japanese said no.
But on the 18th of February 1943, the Japanese declared that all stateless refugees who had arrived later than 1937 were to be rounded up and forcibly relocated to a restricted area in the city's Hongqiu district. Hongqiu was a crowded, squalid area of less than 1 square mile. Virtually overnight, the population in the ghetto swelled to its bursting point. Life was heavily restricted, with a pass system controlling the refugees' movements, distributed by the often cruel Goya.
We were supposed to get a pass, but we left sometimes without a pass and stayed out for 2-3 nights, and we worked in a restaurant or in a nightclub, and we slept there on the benches or whatever you have. And if the Japanese, if they caught us, so we were beaten up, you know. At one time, they got my brother, and he got really terribly beaten up.
We moved into an area which was restricted. By that I mean you could not leave the area. You were restricted in your activities. The rations or the food the Japanese provided was subhuman. And the flour that they supplied for the bakeries was rat infested. The rationing was 1 ounce of butter a week. It was a 100% dramatic change in the ghetto.
Accommodation was a room from here to here, but the stove is this. It was our room, and there was kitchen. There was everything. The outside was there was a faucet outside where you could wash yourself. Sometime in winter the water was frozen and you couldn't open it. We had a little Chinese stove. They called it Chinese stove, like a clay pot, and you started out with newspaper and then wood, and you buy little coals, this pressed coals, and you fan it. It's very hard to get it. Once it gets going, then you take it into the room and you cook on it, and that serves as a stove, a heater, and everything. There were times if you don't keep the windows open once in a while, you can just pass out from the gases, which I did one time. But then you usually get up again after a while, you know, you can just fresh air. But that was, and we had bunk beds in that little room. So my parents and I slept on the top bed, my parents slept in the lower bed, and it was all one little room.
Despite the hardship that existed, the refugees made the best of what they had. Many survived through sheer grit and determination. Cultural life flourished due to the creativity and hard work of the refugees, and that helped many survive the dark days of the ghetto. With the Japanese surrender in 1945, the Second World War had come to an end. Shanghai was finally liberated, and everyone rejoiced. Jubilation, however, was short-lived. The refugees learnt of the horrors inflicted on their loved ones in the Nazi death camps of Hitler's crazed final solution. 6 million Jews had perished. For the Jewish refugees, emigration was the only option. Shanghai was but a temporary refuge from Nazi-controlled Europe. It would be a city they would never forget, and a people to whom they would remain eternally grateful. Although ravaged and war-torn by the Japanese occupation, post-war Hong Kong and its people played an integral part in helping the refugees start anew. Hong Kong provided a transit port and a base through which to obtain visas. It was often a difficult and lengthy process. The Peninsula Hotel provided the refugees with much-needed accommodation during the acute housing crisis. Hong Kong's Jewish community, though battered by the war, pulled together for the necessary paperwork, luggage handling, and logistics needed to help the refugees start new lives. They migrated to the United States, the newly established State of Israel, Australia, the Soviet Union, Europe, or South America.